message saying her mic's not working.
Okay, as long as she can hear us. Is everybody happy with this being recorded? There's a number of people who couldn't attend that were hoping I might be able to record and send it out to them. Are we all happy with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you everyone again. So just to cover why we're here today, really, I mean, since I came from Dudley over to Telford, I think many of you have seen how enthusiastic I am about what we achieved in Dudley and what PSIAMS has meant for commissioning teams and the sector, and most importantly the people on the ground needing support over in Dudley. And that's been very much around, like I say, the common assessment tools that are able to build better data for people to better demonstrate that social impact and cost savings for people, and improve efficiencies and better informed commissioning for individuals. And I know it's very much high on the agenda here in Telford for the voluntary sector, having had sight of some documents around a voluntary sector event that was organised in October last year by the COG with Caro from Citizens Advice. And I know that having a common assessment is really high on the agenda for the voluntary sector here. So with that in mind, obviously, I wanted to bring people together, and it did snowball somewhat into having a couple of different sessions for a couple of different groups. So how it's going to work today is that I'll pass over to Kate to give a bit of an overview of how she's found the system and the impact that it's made over in Dudley. Over to James then to do a demonstration of the system, for then to open to a bit of a Q&A conversation for the rest of the session. If that's okay with everyone, I'll pass over to Kate and let her begin.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. So I think the idea for this session was we can share information with you just a bit about the history of PSIAMS, and we've been using it a long time as a CVS, and more from my perspective, from a social prescribing kind of project is where I've got the most knowledge in terms of how we use the PSIAMS system. But I think that then the idea of this session is James is going to kind of show you a little bit of a demonstration, show you the system and kind of what it looks like. We can do that, but I don't think it'd be most useful to kind of then follow on with like an informal discussion, just about a chat about looking at what you're trying to achieve really in Telford, and then questions and things about how the system could potentially work for you. So I think that might be, rather than it being sort of like a formal structured session, it'd be good to have like a two-way kind of conversation. So how this all got started was we worked really closely with Dudley CCG. They commission a few different projects within CVS, and obviously they commission frontline voluntary sector organisations for a variety of different services. And we were finding in Dudley, well, back 8 or 9 years ago, this kind of started, was lots of different voluntary sector groups were using all sorts of different systems, some paper systems, some IT systems, or developing their own that were quite basic. So there was conversations about a way that the sector could have kind of a bit of a CRM system that could help them kind of better manage their data. Some groups locally were struggling in terms of how do we really show impact and demonstrate kind of outcomes? How do we do that in a more sort of consistent way? And because sort of the sector was working kind of in silos in terms of their own systems or what they captured, it kind of led to not much kind of strategic data about what is happening across the voluntary sector as a whole, how many people are kind of they're working with, what are some of their interventions, and what are some of the trends and gaps that are coming out from their work as a borough as a whole, to then sort of feed that up to commissioners, and also to show you like the value and the outcomes that the voluntary sector is achieving, because all that data was kind of held individually within organisations. So we were having conversations, early conversations with the CCG, and they were saying some kind of system that all voluntary sectors use, where we could then log into that system to see certain elements of that data, and that we could use for data reporting would be really useful. So that's where kind of PSIAMS kind of came on board. The CCG gave us, well, they kind of commissioned us to develop the system, bearing in mind looking at what they wanted to achieve from that data. So that's when kind of PSIAMS was born, really. So that was a really good starting point. And then a lot of obviously that involved meeting with organisations and commissioners, looking at as a whole system what they wanted to achieve, and then building the system up from that, and then supporting groups with developing their system and what they were looking to achieve and their needs, and then how we would use that data kind of collectively. So we've got a lot of groups in Dudley using that system and have been for a long time. We use it as a CVS for a variety of different projects within our services. But what from my perspective, I guess I've got more experience within our social prescribing project, and we've been using it pretty early on from when our social prescribing project was developed. And what it enabled us to do really was all sorts of things. So we had a consistent approach across our teams in terms of and a holistic kind of viewpoint, a very person-centred viewpoint, a common assessment kind of framework, which Terry's kind of touched on. So we looked at the whole needs of that person. Everybody within the team was using the same paperwork. It was then logged on the system. So it helped us to show not just things like outputs, you know, where referrals were coming from. We could then look at trends in terms of are we getting more referrals from one locality in the borough than others. We could then sort of look at what outcomes we were achieving, what impact our interventions were having. Everybody was using the same system in the team as well, so it's helpful to look at in terms of more like a data management system for individual link officers in terms of who they were working with, what interventions were being done. We built in kind of risk management frameworks within that system. And then the biggest useful part of the tool, I think, was it's good on the front line, but what I could then do is pull off reports and look at data trends within that service, and then use that data easily to report up to commissioners about what that project was achieving and what some of the cost sort of avoidance figures were. We've also built in kind of verified tools, outcome measurement tools within the system. So we built in the care plans, we've built in kind of the WebWEMS, the ULCA isolation scaling. So it's got verified tools that's built in within the system. So that's been really useful for us in terms of live data. Our commissioners of that service also had access to the system. Obviously you can lock out certain parts because of data protection, but they could actually just tap in and just get live data on how many referrals that we'd had, how many people had exited the support. So it's great for that sort of holistic viewpoint in terms of outcomes data, but also just practically on a performance management day-to-day system has been really useful for us. So we've got a lot of groups that are now using it within Dudley and also across the Black Country. So lots of other kind of projects and CVSs use it, and obviously wider kind of nationally. There's a variety of different organisations that are now using that system. It's great as well because it's a secure system, so that's worked really well for us. And it's developing and progressing all the time. So from my point of view, that just gives you a little bit of how we've used it and how we've used some of that data. I think, James, are you going to just do a bit of some slides of a presentation, and then we can show you a bit of a demo, because it's all good and well talking about a system, but it's nice to actually see how it works and see what some of those reports look like.
I thought we was going straight for a demo, Kate, instead of the...
Okay, yeah, we'll go straight to the demo. That's great.
Is that okay? It's all right, because I don't know if I've got it with me now that you've said that now.
Just before you start, James, obviously Jennifer's just come on the call. I just wonder whether Jennifer should introduce herself, if that's all right. Come on, Jen, unmute yourself.
Sorry. Hi everyone, I'm Jen. I work for Court Street, but I run the high intensity user service. So I work closely with the CCG in the hospital. So I'm just quite interested to see how this could be used.
Oh, great. That's good, Jennifer, because we run our high intensity user. We've got two social prescribing projects. So we've got one that's our main kind of one for mainly connected to the primary care networks and GPs. And then we've got our high intensity user one that connects in with the hospital.
Oh, fantastic. I also work quite closely with the social prescribers as well. So, yeah.
Brilliant.
Thanks, guys.
Right,
James, over to a demo.
Share the screen now. With any luck, this should be seamless now. There we go. Can everyone see okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so just a little bit of information before we start. So the SIAMS system itself is built on a platform called Salesforce. It is the #1 CRM in the world. There's a lot of large organisations that use this. For example, Coca-Cola, Adidas, Nike. There's some larger charity and non-profit areas as well. So UNICEF. There's quite a few homeless charities using this system as well. Down in London, I believe, the Salesforce system. Today's demo is going to be on our live multi-tenanted system in Dudley. All the records that you're going to see today are ones that I've created, so all of the information is fake data today. And the only thing that's going to be actual data that you're going to see is going to be on the reports and dashboards, and that's going to be anonymized data, so there's no any demographics there that can be identified from there, but it will give you a bit more of a live taste on a wider scale across quite a few organisations with the reports I'm going to show. So I'm just going to start with homepage. So as soon as you log into SIAMS, you're greeted with the homepage. This is split up into two main areas. So along the top, you have the navigation bar, which will follow you throughout the system, and I'll go into some details with that in a moment. And then underneath, you have what we call the homepage, the main homepage section here, and this can contain many different tools. In this example, we have reports here, we have recent records, events and tasks, and a chatter feature here. And the chatter feature is a little bit like a Twitter or a Facebook feed of groups, because you can create groups within the system and you can join multiple groups. You can have conversations through there as well. So you can have that sort of that group interaction there. Along the top, with our navigation bar, right at the very top, we have a search function. This search function is very much like a Google search within the system. So you can search for pretty much anything that you need to in there, and it will return some options. So for example, I could type in test, for example. Well, I can spell test, for example, and then that will bring through some registration records again. You could search for reports and some other metrics as well. And then what you can do is you can click search, and then it will return all your options there. To the just underneath there, we have our tabbing system. We view this a little bit like how you would have a folder on a person. So you'd have the tabs on the side. So it's like having that tabular form, but just along the top. And then to the right hand side, we have like some other system information here around yourselves. You can put your name. You can put a picture on there as well if you want to. Quite a few organisations like that as well. You can put some little bit about information about yourselves as well. And then back over here, we have our, just a list of organisations. But again, this can be, this is really useful in multi-tenanted systems for people that manage them. So you can sort of see the other organisations that are using the system. Underneath here, so the report that we're showing here is just around logins today of the system. So administrators and also the organisations themselves can see how many people are logging in to their system. This is my overarching view, so I can see all of the organisations. Obviously, that information would just be to their own organisation on their own teams, but again, that could be any report that's in the system. With events, we actually have our Office 365 account attached to this, so I can see my events for today, and then that will pass through some information as well. And then the tasking system, so I can show you a little bit more about that. So my tasks can be, so this is around support tickets that we have for our system, and again, this can be used in many different ways. In one of the examples that I'll show in a minute, it will show any tasks that are related to me or sent by anybody if an inquiry is made on the system. So I'm going to go into inquiries just to show you this. So inquiries is pretty much any sort of interaction really that's going to be inbound, that's going to be entered, well, inquired about about a service. So it could be a phone call, it could be an email, it could be somebody walking in, for example. And this is just a really quick way of organisations being able to track and sort of record all of that information. So I'll just open up a demonstration one here. So when we open this up, it will have, it will be split, most of the time will be split into 3 sections. So along the top, we have some things that we can do with this record. So we can edit, we can create, we can migrate it to a registration in this instance as well. And then in the actual editing view, so this is what our data inputting screens look like. So we can just scroll through here. So it can record in this example, the date and time of inquiry, the name of the inquirer, what were they inquiring about, and again, all of this can be completely tailored to any organisation and groups of organisations. We can have referral sources as well, so if they come from any particular organisation. And then we can have sort of marketing information here, some information about the referrer if it was coming through from a referrer as well. And then we have our demographic information of the referral person as well, which will then lead on to how we can migrate a referral into a registration. So there's lots of different things that we can do with this. Again, this is just a taste really of what the system can do. There are a lot of fields here, and you probably think for an inquiry that's quite a lot. And again, it's just for this instance, it just gives you a bit more of an idea of what can be recorded. Underneath there as well, we have the assignment section. So, for example, if a call was taken centrally by an organisation, that person filling this inquiry could then say it needs to go to James, because James would deal with those services that are being required about, for example, and then we can go from there really, and then you can save it, and then what that will do is it will enable a task to be sent to me, and also via an email as well. So there's quite a few different points there where information can be sent to the correct user. So this is inquiries. To the right-hand side of that, so these are the items that are related to this record. So we have follow-up, signposting. You can also add in referrals as well. So if you wanted to just note that you've referred this person onto another organisation or signposted them there as well. So at the end of the year, you can collate all of that information together, and then you can start to see where you're where you're sending people onto and migrating them forward really. So that's in inquiries. A different form of inquiry we have is referrals, and referrals can take place in a couple of different ways. So within the system, you can enter them just straight into the system here by the inputting screens here, but you can also have them, so PSIAMS can connect to your website, for example. So if you have really online referral pages via your website, you can that information can be passed through. Obviously, there's a few technical requirements for that, but that enables referrals to be dealt with a lot quicker as well. It would also reduce the administration time as well. So there's a few different things really with referrals there. Referrals themselves, again, will contain all of the information from any referral documents you may have. Again, the actual template for this can be shared between multiple organisations as well, and there can be some additional sections added for each organisation, so you can get the the information that makes that organisation different between other organisations. So we can customise this per organisation, but the key areas of information that you want to track, for example, can be kept exactly the same, and that information can and that templating idea can be passed across a lot of different areas of the system. So I've just got some of those there. I'm just trying to, and then we've got registrations. So with registrations, this is where we can keep the core demographic information of a person. So this is what the primarily is used as part of the sharing aspects of PSIAMS. So this information can be as a part of the multi-tenanted parts of the systems that we create. This is the part of the record that can be shared between multiple organisations. So obviously with data consent and sharing parameters in place, that this information can be sent to other organisations. So in a way, it's like making an internal referral between organisations that use PSIAMS, as opposed to obviously getting all of that information off, being able to either send that via email or via post, or whichever way that it's a referral like that would usually take place. So it's a lot more secure as well within the system. So then that can be passed through. The registration is pretty much the heart page of the system, and then to the right hand side of that you can have everything and all of the interactions with a person. We're all within one page. So to the right hand side we can see any inquiries that that person has made, any referrals. We have some web records here as well, areas of one-to-one supports that have been done. We have support plans, risk assessment. So you can start to see the actual record of that person really coming to life here, because everything is all in one place, everything is linked together. Within the registration page as well, we have a couple of other little bits as well. So with the address information, it actually produces a Google map as well from their address. And what can happen is for organisations that are a bit more outreach support, they can use the web version of the mobile app version, sorry, of PSIAMS, and then they can click on the map here, and then what that will do is it will then take them into a Google map. So again, if they're using navigations for cars, for example, you can use it via there as well. So there's got that information in there as well. There are a few other metrics in the background that take place as well. So from the date of birth, you can work out age. There are some other features on here as well. So phone calls. So you can, if you do have a telecommunication with that can work with Salesforce, that you can actually take calls straight from the system as well. You can enable that feature as well. Our core demographics. So at the moment, if I could scroll down to equality information. So at the moment, this is just based on, I believe it's Big Lottery and European data metrics. So again, we can just start to capture a lot of different things. And this can start to build up really the framework for organisations. So from a commissioning side, everyone's sort of singing off the same hymn sheet, as it were. And then all the metrics can come back and it's exactly the same. And then obviously we can break that down via organisations and then into larger overarching of all organisations as well. So you can start to see metrics. We do have other items as well that we can add in as well. So for example, we can add in ward finder as well. So it would automatically find the ward from postcodes as well with that information. So we can start to then do some reporting. And from that report, you can actually export that out and it can go into other software like Power BI, for example, Microsoft product that can do heat mapping as well. So you can then start to produce heat maps as well. So you can sort of flag particular areas as well through metrics that way. And then we also have a GDPR compliance section here. So I'll open this back up again and I can show you that in a little bit more detail. So what we've managed to do is we've created some fields here that will cover sort of GDPR compliance for organisations to sort of help them along. All of this information can be changed as well, because we know that there's different policies and different wordings for different areas and different organisations. So again, we can mould that around as well, but it sort of helps organisations in the right sort of, put them in the right sort of direction really. So we have around compulsory consent and consents from clients, so we can have it as in-person consent, remote consent, and then that can go from anywhere from full share, limited share, no sharing at all of their information, for example. And then we have verbal with the same sort of or implied consent, and then through the same sort of metrics of sharing options. To the right hand side of that, we have consent for staff. So this is around from an organisational point of view. So, for example, a person could say, well, actually, I don't want you to share any information, but there may be a legitimate interest in this, or it could be a public interest or a legal interest, for example. So it could be a safeguarding issue. So you can actually highlight that as well within the record as well, just in case you need to pass anything on for any particular reason, because it could be a safeguarding issue. Then we also have things around marketing, so you can start to really get into some of the more important bits of marketing, because it's not just obviously it's not just as simple now. It's just having a tick box to say we're okay for marketing. So we have obviously a lot more information in there as well. How the information format for clients. So how would they want their information getting to them if they need any information? And then we have newsletter sign up. We have research consent as well. So obviously now service users and clients have to obviously give consent to obviously doing any sort of research with their data as well. So it's a bit more explicit there as well. And then underneath we have a last interaction date. Now, the last interaction date is used across all of our organisations, and this is to do with their retention policies, which can all be completely different per organisation or depending on contractual obligations as well. And what this does is it will update the last interaction date with that person. So whenever you create something or you edit something, this can be updated. And then what can happen is that would then show in reports. So if you haven't interacted for this person for an X amount of time, so if, for example, we said 2 years and 2 years comes round, that person would then show in this report. So it then really helps organisations get ahead of making sure that all of their data that they hold is completely compliant with their retention policies. From there as well, you can flag for them to be deleted as well, which will then move them to another report and then a central administrator either for that organisation or for the multi-tenanted aspect can then start to process and delete those older records as well. So that's a little bit about registrations. Throughout the system, you can go to the next page via the registration itself. So from here, we can create a new WebWebs from here, or we can go from the top. So it sort of gives a couple of different ways of moving around the system. But for this instance, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on this WebWebs record here. So with this particular record, there's a couple of things that happen with it. So we can define whether it is a midterm or post record. So we can start to then track progressional movement of that person by using WebWebs. And then all the metrics here. So all the if you're aware of WebWebs questions, and obviously the answers will be quite familiar. So again, it's a really simple process. You can even tab through this as well, so you can go through there, and it can be a lot easier. And obviously, there's calculations behind WebWebs as well that usually and traditionally you would have to do yourselves as well, which the system will take care of as well. So all of that is automatically done for you as you answer the questions, and then we'll produce a score automatically as well. So that sort of helps with any human error as well, making sure that that's completely accurate. So the system will take over that. You can also connect it to personal development plans and one-to-ones as well. So if you were doing a one-to-one but were doing the WebWebs assessment with them as well, you can sort of track that information as well throughout the system. And then what happens is that would then produce a score at the bottom, and then in the reports for that person, because we can have reports on the person themselves, and that information can sit on the registration page, or as an organisation you can see them as an average between all of them, and I can show you that report later on. That can show the sort of the start, the middle, and the end results on average for people. So those are those bits of information there. The next one is one-to-ones. So one-to-one is any sort of interaction that takes place with a service user or client. This information is really, really useful because with the start date and time and the end date and time, we can start to work out duration of support. So with the duration of support, we can then start to tally that up into the total number of hours of support as being delivered by a service, because some services have clients that have that are either funded or privately pay for support from a service. So you can start to track information from there, but you can also see cost saving information as well from this via reports, for example. So we know from information that we've been given from a couple of organisations how much it would cost for a nurse to provide this sort of support, a social worker, for example, as well, and then measuring that back with the actual cost of the voluntary sector as well. So you can start to see overarching statistics there around cost saving via the supporting methods, and those can be applied to loads of different areas of the system. Once we have the information about that, we can tailor that to any part of the system. We also track loads of different types of metrics as well. So we can see the support types, so whether it be an inbound or outbound. So you can start to see the movement of organisations and how they interact with service users. Support given as well, and again, this is just a bit of a taste really of the options that can be there. We can also flag things as well, and then that will then move to different areas of the system to flag. So if we did put this as a red flag, this can sit on their registration page, so people would know to check obviously something out if there was some issues there as well. We have some supporting notes as well, so we can get the qualitative information as well, and then we have some key working notes as well. But a service user can also do a rating of that service as well, so they can actually fill that information in or pass that on to the member of staff to sort of say where that sort of session was, and then those organisations can then use that as part of their end of year reports, for example, to see what their level of service is via their client base. Support plans is a really quick, simple tool really that covers a lot of different areas. So very similar really to how the other information is sort of collected and stored. So we can have information about the agreements about sharing your plans with others, the caring and support preferences you have, personal reflection, goals and aspirations that person has as well, and then the summary of support that they receive as well. And then you've got some more information around days that they're available, budgets and different things, so it will help with tracking those metrics as well for organisations. You also have histories as well, because what can happen is you can just create a new one of these and all of the history will stay there as well, so you can start to track that information. Risk assessment. So this risk assessment is a bit of a mix really across a couple of organisations that we've made into a really detailed risk assessment. So we can have risk assessments on clients where we've got the flag indications. We can see who's created that as a user of the system, the dates of this. You can also have a pre-risk checklist, so communication issues, mobility, personal care, and there's loads of different areas here. You can also have harm to self as well, so you can harm to self, harm to others, activity, physical health, mental health, and then other areas here as well, so you can check the information there. And then what you can do is we can actually add individual risks to this as well, so you can see whether it is flagged around what the issue is, whether it needs to be flagged, and then the risk level as well. So with risk levels, this is standardized across the systems as well, so we have a scaling process, so we can go from a no risk to a high intense and likely, so you can really nail down where that risk sort of sits as an organizational standpoint. But you can also then put in a mitigation plan and how that's been reduced as well, so we can start to see those metrics as well, so how organizations can help reduce risk either to themselves as working with this person or to that person themselves as well, and that's risk. Attendances. Attendances is a group-based part of the system that records registrations for people that join groups. Within this section, you can add everyone that you have here, and I'll just click on a bit of view all, so you can see we've got some test data in here. And then from there, we can actually create new sessions. So then you can start to really get some better information about the groups that you're doing. You can put some information here as well around the notes of what's going to happen in that session. And when that session is created, all of the people are brought over automatically. And what you can do is from there, you can print an attendance list. So you can go out to that group and you can see attendance lists. And then what you can also do is as well, if I go back a page, oh, come on, you can register their attendances as well. So this is all done on one page. So it makes things a lot easier instead of having to go through a lot of different pages of the system. And what happens is all of that information can get stored via here as well. And then this will then update their last interactions as well. And then all of that information will get stored in their attendances, so you can see at a glance when they were last in a group session, so you can track clients through a lot easier as well. And then after that, we've got exits. So exits is just what we see as a bit of a capping of a client's journey at that particular time. And then what that can do is that can update the registration page to say that they are inactive. So you can get a sort of and if that is connected to referrals as well, so you can see when they were referred in and when they exited the service, so you can see the sort of duration of time that that person was within service as well. So this is just a couple of around 300 different solutions that we've created for systems in and around the UK for organisations. And what we'll do next is we'll look at the reports now. So with reports, I'll just go on to the demo ones. It's probably where more the interesting information is really, right at the very end. So with reports, I've got a few examples here. So we've got things like users that have logged in today. So similar to the one that was on the homepage, we have some one-to-one cost savings. So where I was talking a little bit more around sort of how many hours had taken place over a set period of time, and then measuring that against some standardized costing metrics there. We have total service users, and then we're sort of breaking that down by gender and then ethnicity as well, which sort of gives a bit of an information around how much we can just manipulate the data within the system. Total hours spent with clients, so we can start to see that as an organisation point. And then we have WebRev's report as well, where we're talking a little bit about where you have the before, the during service, and then at the end of service, where you can start to see that progressional movement as well. So I'll just open up the one-to-one cost savings report. This might take a little bit of time just to load this one, because I think it contains around 1,500 records, if I remember rightly. So it's just a bit of information really that's going to just take a bit of time just to come through. While that's while that one's loaded, I'll open up another one. So on this one here, so this is where we have all the, okay, oh, there we go. Okay, so we have total service users on this one. So this is across organisations in the Dudley multi-tenanted system, where their registration was created last financial year. So we can see loads of different bits of information here. So we can see a breakdown of genders here. And we also have then the further breakdown into the ethnicities as well. So you can start to get the metric out of there as well and get some really good data from this. And then from there, you can actually add in postcodes as well. So you can start to do different area zones as well. You can also change all this on the fly as well. So you can change all of this information. So we can change that around. So we can change the type of graph. So we can start to see things in a little bit less detailed in this respect, because it will just give us the by gender, but then we can actually change that to ethnicity as well. So we can change some bits around here as well, which is all done on system. There are loads of different ways of viewing this information as well. So we have different charts, different chart types here as well, and then we can change that around to say have it around this way, for example. So we can change those areas. There as well. So there's loads of different ways of manipulating data. It is really, really simple as well to use the reporting tool here as well. So we can just add in loads of other things. So for example, we can add in, let's have a think what we can add in. We can add just trying to think what would be a really good example actually. We've got so much information. There we go. We'll go age. So we can do service user age as well, for example, and it's really quick to just group that in together as well. So you can add loads of different information, and then that automatically updates all of the reports and then shows the data straight away because it's all live within the system. We'll go back to, oh, there we go. So this report shows cost savings via one-to-one. So again, this is over a similar period. So this one is in the last quarter of the last financial year. So this will show all of the one-to-one interactions that have taken place. We can see from the graphs here, that, just along the top as well, that we have the total cost if your GP was to provide the support on average cost, and then again for a nurse, and then the total hours for the organisation itself in cost per time. For that as well, the average hours as well, so how long are we spending with clients on average, and then also the give back. So if a volunteer was providing those one-to-one supports as well, which one organisation has done previously before, so you can sort of show that sort of give back as well via a volunteer perspective as well. So you can really see the information breakdown here, and then this information can be based on anything. So if we know the cost of, say, I'm just trying to think, I can't remember the word. So a support worker, another support worker, for example, if we know the cost for that, then we can put that metric information in there as well. So you can do sort of cost-effective sorts of breakdowns there as well. So that's the cost savings report. WenWeb is another interesting one. So with WenWeb, so this will have all of the information. So we can have it as pre, the midterm one, and then the post one. So you can really see the information and the progressional movement. Things that are in the sort of lighter blue colour here is scores on average. So we can see that it moves up a little bit in midterm and then really ramps up towards the end. And then from there we have like the largest scores that have been created, and then the lowest one, so you can start to see where that really comes into effect with different types of people as well. And again, we can add more information in from there as well, because we can, from the postcodes and different things like that as well, we can add that breakdown as well. And then all of this information can be put into a dashboard. Now, a dashboard is a really quick way of looking at loads of reports at one time. And these are used quite a lot for managers really, and then sort of having the strategic look of an organisation as well, because you can create loads of reports and have them all on one screen. A lot of people that use PSIAMS take these to commissioning meetings. They also go to board meetings with this as well. So it gives you a really clear live snapshot of how an organisation is doing at any one time. This information is all very similar to what we've seen before, but obviously the reports, the charts themselves are a lot different as well. So we can start to see the average cost for a nurse here, for example, in this one, and then the average cost if a voluntary sector organisation was doing it as well. So we can start to see the sort of real gaps there between the cost saving sections here as well. The total number of hours spent with a client as well. So this is going to be over a set year, over loads of organisations. So I can appreciate you probably think that number's quite large there as well. There are loads of different types of graphs as well, and these can be used in different ways. So for example, we have, with the users logged in today, we have a scale here, so we can see how many people have logged in today, and then that can be put towards a lot of different things. So for example, if you had a goal of saying that you needed to have 100 referrals a month, for example, you can do it via that data, and then you can work it out where you are in the month to how many referrals you've had in for that time. Then you can sort of see where you're sort of getting to around those time areas as well. And then again, we can have the WenWeb's reports here as well. We can change the metrics of how that completely works as well. We can change that around, and again with the ethnicity one as well, this one's a lot easier to view because obviously this report's a bit bigger as well, so you can really see that breakdown of all the different ethnicities and their breakdown via gender as well. And again, this can be applied to absolutely any field in the system. And again, this is only 2 fields for this report, from one record. So again, the possibilities are really endless, really, on what you can report on. And what's really good about the system is as well that you may want to do some more in-depth research into the reports that are coming out as well. So you can export those into Excel as well. So any other software that you may have and that you can do reporting on, all of that information can be exported out to the system as well, which is really, really simple and easy to do as well. So that is a look at dashboards, and that is a look of the a really brief look really on the system itself. As I say, there are over 300 different solutions. I've just pulled together a few really and put some records in. So appreciate obviously if there's any questions around, can it do this, can it do that as well? So I can answer those questions, because we really do hit quite a lot of different areas that we've created systems for. So thank you very much for me showing you that.
Thanks, James. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Brilliant. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways that you can configure the system. It's quite mind-boggling in terms of how many different configurations of fields and tabs. But that's kind of like, yeah, as James said, a demonstration of the potential of the system, really. So yeah, over to you guys really to see what kind of what do people think.
I've written out a whole load of questions.
Who wants to go first? Are you okay to go first, Craig?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first.
James,
I mean, there's some.
Take your screen sharing off. Well, you might need it actually, so we can always come back to it. So yeah, Craig.
Yeah. I mean, instantly. I mean, yeah, the system looks great. I don't even know whether it's an option locally, whether we have something alternative locally or anything like that. But I mean, just going through it, there was things that I was popping up. So basically, like, I mean, you essentially roll this out to loads of different organisations. So do they have their own access level to write into the system?
Yeah, so we can completely customize a multi-tenanted system in loads of different ways. So for example, if you could imagine a bubble with loads of other little bubbles inside it, we can segregate every organization from each other in its entirety. So there wasn't any sort of data sharing at all. So we can do that. We have done that in some parts of Dudley as well, where there's some organizations that don't share data. They can all have different access levels as well. And again, with things like, say, if we had a general assessment that everyone needs to use, so we have a core set of information, underneath each section can then be hidden to other organisations where that particular organisation wanted some more metrics around things that really mean something to them but nobody else. So we can even do it down at a record level as well, around just splitting everybody up and giving different access levels.
I mean, it's clear that the system is based heavily around a person.
Yes.
So a patient, a service user, whatever you're going to call them for whatever service is involved. And just thinking about, so all users, are they restricted in what PID that can be seen? So again, it's applicable to a service user type. And then for thinking about the users that really need to start discussing patient or service users that are put into the system, do they automatically get access to PID for that patient to start those discussions? And I'm just thinking about data sharing agreements would be so complex across multiple organizations to even get this off the floor at all.
Yeah, so there's loads of different things that we can do. So even within an organisation, we can give different levels to what everybody can see. So for example, we can operate even within an organisation, instead of sharing between the entire organisation, we can set it so only a group of people, so if they work in the same department, for example, can see those records that they can see, and then adding in sharing options at that point to say, oh, we're going to move this person into a different service. within the organisation as well. So it is really, really flexible like that, or it can be completely open. So we can build it completely different for every organisation within the system. And in terms of moving from organisation to organisation, we can do exactly the same thing as well. So everything can be completely locked off, and then individual bits, obviously with consent and obviously data sharing agreements in place, then we can add in sharing options. So either it can be shared automatically, or there needs to be a sharing option that is selected, and then that is then moved forward. So there's loads of different ways that we can build that, and every option really is pretty much available within the system.
Kate, can I throw that back to you, obviously with a different slant on? How did you find, obviously, that, so the system says, yes, it can do what I've just asked, but how did you find that from getting engagement from multidisciplinary teams, whether they be local authority, private, etc.? How did that work from your point of view?
So we have all the data sharing agreements in place. I think the thing that's just, you've got to get that right from the offset in terms of what you want the system to do for you, and then you work around those solutions and options. So for example, with our social prescribing service, we can share certain amounts of data to refer to other organisations that are also using the system, but we make sure we've got the consent from the client to do it, and we've got the data sharing agreements in place with the organisations, like a joint data sharing agreement. So it's just making sure you use and the data's entered by the staff that are using it in the right way, so you are only sharing the data that's been agreed and consented to. But as James said, it's about limits. Access to the data can be limited to certain people using the system. So our commissioner for social prescribing project could log in and see the dashboards, but he was not allowed to see the personal identification sort of information of that person. But if he was like, okay, well, from a performance management point of view, as a commissioner to contracting us, he could instantly see just the number of referrals that are coming in, but then couldn't actually have access to that patient data. So it was quite heavily restricted in terms of, we pre-agreed all of that in terms of what people and levels of access people wanted to. So once we got all the right data sharing agreements in place, and we really explored, why do you want access to that data? What's the benefit of you having access to that data? That's the more important stuff to do before you start using the system. So we haven't found a problem with that. I mean, obviously there's some organisations and some patients that are like, I don't want my data shared at all. We've got the data sharing agreements also covers. So within our IP team, our social prescribing team, we've got 12 staff. Now, those 12 staff use our bubble of that part of the PSIAMS platform. So we get consent also to be able to share that data within the team, because anybody else in the team could have access to their records. So it's just unpicking all of that sort of data stuff and just making sure you're getting the consent, and the system supports what you're building around that, really. So probably the thing I would say with the system, a couple of kind of, I guess, hints and tips is, don't rush into having the system developed for you. You've really got to look at first what you want that system to do for you and for what stakeholders, and make sure that you're really clear on what you're going to use it for, what data that you actually want, and then you can start to build in, well, who would have access to it, who's going to log the data. I mean, like from a commissioner point of view, they might want to have access to reports. So what level of access are you giving that to the commissioner? So otherwise, I think going from our learning experience, particularly, one was tricky with social prescribing because it was new when we developed our project to start. And then our commissioners were coming to us, can you now start to collect this? Can you now start to collect that? And we kept having to build data within the system on top because we were being told to collect that data. And that actually made it quite messy. But we've got there now that the system works beautifully for us. But I think if you can get it right from the offset about exactly what data you want to, don't try and make too many changes to it as you go along, because that's when it makes it confusing. And then the data issue comes in, and what do we do with that data, or can we share that data, because we're now being asked for that at a later date. So we haven't really come across any major issues with the data. It's just making sure that you're following the procedures properly, and you're just giving the right level of access to the people that want what, and not allowing them to see things that they shouldn't. Does that kind of answer your question? I know it does or it doesn't. But
it does, and it's a weird one that obviously I'm CCG, so I'm commissioner. I'm not allowed to see PID, which is crazy considering we're working with patients. So basically, I work in pseudonymized world. So basically, we based around either a pseudonymized NHS number or obviously a local patient identifier if we're looking at local PAS systems in trusts and things like that. So in regards to if I was to log into this and I wanted to look at, yes, overall reports, I could see, okay, X amount of contacts and has caused X amount of savings. But, and piece of work that I focus on heavily with Jen is all of our social prescribing, all of the HIU, high intensity service users, etc. They are patient focused. So from that point of view, I might want to see patient level trend. So what type of pseudonymization happens in the software? For me, as I'm not allowed to see PID, I could go and say, I want to see patient X in that software. But then I also want to kind of be able to identify that back to a pseudonymized number that I would use. So is that taken into account? Do you use the pseudonymized NHS number, or what is the pseudonymized view that I would get?
So we don't, in terms of our social prescribing element of PSIAMS. We have a patient ID number that's unique to that person. We do collect their NHS number. Some organisations collect their NI number and stuff as well, but from a commissioner point of view, they would just see the overall. So I don't know, I'm just trying to think of an example. So we use PAM, the patient activation measures. So if the commissioner wanted to, I want to see the results of PAM for the clients that we've worked with in the last 12 months, they could go in and see that report, but they wouldn't have any access to the patient data. So, I mean, our commissioners have never asked to say, or let me log into John's data and I want to see what his PAM results are. They don't look, they look at it at a higher level than that. So they look at the overall results of PAM, not as an individual. I guess, I mean, there'd be options around that. I guess if a commissioner wanted to do that, we could look at that. We could look at kind of identification numbers. I guess you'd have to look at, I mean, I guess, James, the PSIAMS ID number would be your kind of your ID level, wouldn't it? Because that would show the NHS.
Microphone, James.
You're on mute,
James.
The IT person can never get it right. So yeah, there are a couple of different ways that we can do with that. So if you wanted a bit more, apart from going into the report itself, or going into records within the system, we can change what you can see. So we could give you a completely different page layout that removes all of the information that you can't see. So only really focusing on the bits that you are allowed to see. So we can do that through page layout, so that can automatically restrict what you see, so you can't see other things. In terms of how you pseudo-anonymize things, if there is a particular way that you do that and that can be sort of replicated, we could produce those things via, because we do different formula fields in here as well, so we can take this and maybe shuffle it around. So depending on how that system works, we could look at that, or we could just look at using our PSIAMS reference number, because it doesn't make it, apart from it linking, moving things around the system, there is nothing there that can be identified from that number, because it is just a random mix of things.
I guess that the other thing that we make sure we cover though is, see, even some patients might, it's all about the consent again as well, whether it's full consent, research consent. So some a patient might say, well, even though, you know, the commissioner won't know who I am, I'm still uncomfortable about them seeing my individual PAM results, say. So you'd have to think about people that have consented to the research, and then they could share it. If they're opting out of that, then you wouldn't, you'd only see it in one overarching report, but you wouldn't be able to go into that individual person's data, whether it's got its own reference number.
And that's been quite minimal, hasn't it, from your experience?
Yeah.
Been,
no one's really said, when we've explained, no one's going to see your actual address or telephone number or all that sort of stuff. That they've always been happy. So I don't think we've ever had anyone that's not consented to the research.
It's how those workers approach that, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, we also make sure that we've got the research consent for the hospital data for our high intensity user, because we work with the CSU for that in terms of, and obviously they do a lot of that data stuff for us, and they just give us the stats back in terms of from the hospital data system itself, in terms of how many A&E visits within this 6 months period, how many in this 6 months period after. But that data can be imported into PSIAMS. We just don't do it in terms of, so PSIAMS isn't linked to our local hospital data because they've got their own data system. But we can import that data once we've got it pseudonymised. So.
Well, what we can also do is, as well, for that, we can actually put restrictions on reports as well. So, for example, if the research consent wasn't selected, we can filter that out automatically. We can also do that as well through the different permission sets that we have within the system and roles and the hierarchy systems that we have in place. So we can say for yourself, Craig, we can just say that you can't see anybody that doesn't consent to the researching bit as well. So we can build that into your profile requirements as well. So then that's automatically done. And then if that person ever decides to change that from a yes to a no, then that's automatically taken care of as well. So then that gets removed, and then vice versa if it goes the other way. So we can do quite a few other little things like that as well to sort of negate that sort of issue cropping up.
Okay. I've just got 2 more questions, but everybody's probably seen that Saskia's come on the call now. So Saskia's a commissioner for Telford and Wrekin, and she's the commissioner of the high intensity service user. So Saskia, over to you. Introduce yourself, because you are amazing.
Oh wow, that's great. Sorry, I can't get my video to work. Hi, I'm Saskia. I am a nurse by background, and I'm a commissioner in Telford and Wrekin CCG at the moment. And I was given a brief intro into what this meeting was all about, but I'm sorry I'm late. I was in another meeting which I couldn't get out of, which overran. So apologies for that.
Saskia, I have the recorded session, so we'll be able to send that on to you afterwards.
Thank you.
Terry, I'm just, we've had a question on the chat from Sarika. So she's just wondering if PSIAMS can reflect linkages along with referral. So it will show the engagement of the client with the services.
Yeah, so what I can do is actually, I can show you that actually now. So, so if I go back onto here, just stop my camera for a second so you don't look at. Okay, so so for that particular question, so if I go back onto, so I'm on referrals now. You can see here that we have a referring source here as well. So this links to me at the moment, but this could be any organisation. And what we can do is then, from either an on the ground level within an organisation or at a strategic level, we can look at the referral forms and say, out of all the referral forms, where are these where are they coming from, for example? Or we can also look at if we're referring out, we can do exactly the same as well. And then we can start to take the information that's stored in here and then start to create the reports around that as well. So they take precedent over everything else. So we can say that PSIAMS has sent 50 referrals to X organisations and they have received 30 from X organisation. So you can do both of those really easily via this link because the link here links to other parts of the system. So I didn't show you organisations within the system, but this can be used and has been used in Dudley like a yellow pages type idea. So you've got a directory of organisations, but you can also put services here as well. So you can really start to see all of that information, and we can do all that via reports. You can see other things via organisations as well. So for example, service and courses that they provide as well. Volunteer in Dudley, we have volunteer opportunities as well. So you can start to see all of that information. And then pretty much anything really. So you can see organisations like how you would see registrations. There's a lot of things connected to it, and then you can do loads of different reports. So hopefully that answers your question with that one.
We'll never know because the mic's off unless she pops a message on. But I hope so.
Okay, yes, there we go.
Yeah, I guess because you could create reports around each person. So what are the organisations that are currently or have been supporting this person? So then, and again, it depends on what your data sharing agreements, isn't it, in terms of what you're sharing. So if 2 organisations are working with the same person, has the person consented and the 2 organisations consented to having full share of that data, or does it limit, and you can limit it to certain bits that you want to share across those two organisations as long as the client's consenting. So you will get to see a bigger picture of the wraparound support for all different interventions and organisations if you wanted it to do that.
Hi, it's Stacey from Telford. Hi, I think, would you agree, Terry, that's something that we've been looking at, particularly around homelessness and the COVID and trying to understand who's involved, that individual. So, for example, we've had cases where they're involved with homelessness and drug and alcohol services. And so we've had some really key information that, for safeguarding purposes needed to be shared, so that's kind of why we're looking at the system. So I suppose I'm guessing that will kind of sharing of those where it's appropriate, that client information and that record, so everybody involved understand the need of that individual. I think it's quite key.
Oh yeah, and I mean, as a from a practitioner level, you can't have people can't be playing services off from one another as well when you've got telling different people different things, when actually you log onto the system and you say, well, actually I can see here that you didn't attend that assessment. Is that something you need some help with? So yeah, really, really useful on that front.
Yeah.
Craig, did you have another couple of questions? Sorry, Kate, go on.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say this goes back to the point. In essence, really, the system can do whatever you want it to do, but it's about being really clear across organisations, from a council point of view, from the CCG point of view, from a voluntary sector point of view, what you want that system to do. So is it going to be, you want that very strategic overview of what the sector's delivering? Do you want individual organisations collecting their own individual data sets? Do you want, as commissioners, do you want kind of like a joint one-size-fits-all outcomes assessment tool, which then you can see, have a high level access to what's been achieved in the voluntary sector? Do you then want to use that for like the heat maps that James was talking about? Do you want the system to be able to pull off reports quarterly from each organisation that you commission? So I think it's just being really clear what you want the system to do for you and making sure you're getting what data you've collected really bang on before thinking about going into the design phase with the system. If you can have that joint agreement, that naturally flows the conversations about data and consent and then how you can match that to what you're trying to achieve. I guess I can't just emphasise that enough, because otherwise, if you don't get that, if you don't spend enough time doing that right from the offset, it's going to mess up the system later on. And what you don't want to do is then kind of play catch up going on. And we started to do that, but we don't want it to do that now. And then you've already got data collected about that. So just, yeah, be really clear, I guess, on what the system to do for you across the system as a whole. If that's what you're looking at, some kind of joint commissioning system and monitoring system and impact tool and things.
I was just going to say, actually, Kate, as well, when you were talking a little bit more about reports there as well. So with the reporting system, another really good feature that I did miss out was that you are building only the framework for the report itself. So once that's built, then you can change the dates, you can change the time. So you haven't got to keep building the same report every time. So we found that where organisations could take up to 6 weeks every quarter getting things ready, and then at the end of year reports, their reports are done in less than a day, because all they need to do is just change the times, maybe a couple of parameters that have been set, and that's pretty much it. So there is a lot of time saved as well. And I think from a probably commissioning point as well, it sort of enables organisations to focus more on what they're doing instead of spending a very long time getting reports ready for quarterly or end of year or however it's all sort of put together, really. Once that little bit of time has been put in to produce the framework, everything is just really, really seamless and live at that point, so they can refresh it at any time.
I think from seeing the system, I mean, it's probably one of the most joined up systems from multidisciplinary teams I've seen. And it's obviously really effective and the capabilities are just fantastic. One of the things that we were really keen to hear about when we first met with Terry, and it was fantastic. So we've got different teams doing different projects across our way. And Jen's mentioned, and obviously Saskia's part of that, we've got the HRU. We've got a community project, again, that Jen runs down at Court Street there. So that's an open door social prescribing type service. It's just so many different services branch off that. That's fantastic. And we've got other services. And kind of at the moment, we have a methodology of saying, okay, we're going to we use data to identify X amount of patients, or the like of the Court Street Community Project that Jen runs is the fact that it is open door. And yes, they do a really good job of saying, anybody's welcome, you come in and we'll support you however we want. We were really, really, really keen to hear about how you've targeted certain patients. So basically you brought them to the table, you identified certain patients that were in need of support, and that was from multiple organizations. So is it a case that you use the software to identify them patients? So when referrals do come in from different organizations, as a collective group, you say, oh, look, Joe Bloggs has appeared here, Joe Bloggs has appeared there, maybe we need to discuss it. Or do you get together as a collective organization and say, I'm aware of this person, do we need to start inputting their data to see what it looks like? So which way round? Do you rely on the system to identify, or do you do that work as professionals first?
I think really from a system point of view, it could be either or both. It could be a bit of a mix really, because I think it depends really on that person. I would imagine, depending on what they're sort of presenting with. But we can build in areas of the system that we could even call, we call them general assessments usually, but this could be a little bit, like a snippet of a pre-assessment, where you haven't got to register them if you don't want to. You can just get a couple of key bits of information, maybe name, contact information maybe, and a set of questions that, again, could all be collated by yourselves, for example. And then from however those questions get asked, for example, whatever responses come back could mean certain things. And again, we can work with you, on that. To build those in, and then it can give you indications as well if you wanted to. So from the questions that we've asked, we could see that you could do with some help around your housing, for example. We can build those in. If there's any more financial benefit support that you may need as well, that has flagged up a little bit. So we can do a sort of a holding before any sort of mass questions and registration processes, which is quite stressful if you're just starting to talk to a person. We can build in a sort of really small little bit that can ask a few questions and sort of lead to that sort of, well, what help can we provide, and actually where can we go to, for example. So there's a few options like that.
I think for us at the moment, that, I mean, gosh, if we could get to that vision that you've talked about, would be great. We're not, I'd probably say in Dudley, we're not quite there yet, and this thing is developing all the time. So I think the way that it works at the moment is because you've got different organisations in Dudley using the system. At the moment, it's more based on, so for our social prescribing, it's the GPs who identify who they're referring to our social prescribing. Our high intensity user one, that's more joint work with the hospital to identify who their frequent attenders are for A&E. And then we work with them to identify who they want us to work with as part of that scheme. So it's more about either people are telling us within certain projects, can you work with these people? Or for other services, it might be that the person themselves decided that they want to access that service. It's not based by a referral, so it depends on what different services organisations provide. So it's a mixture of those things. What we can do, what we've done within our social prescribing system is, because every person on the system, it's logged. So we get a number of re-referrals into our social prescribing. So you can see that pattern within the system. You know, oh gosh, this person's been re-referred to us 5 times from the same GP. So then you can see, well, why or what's going on there. The same with the high intensity users. It might be like, can you work with this person again because they need X amount of support with this now. When you cross-refer to organisations in the system, that's useful because then you're getting that holistic viewpoint about who's actually working with those organisations, and then those organisations would discuss the support that they're providing or issues that's coming up with that person. But I think it's probably not, it could work better, I think, in terms of what you're talking about. I probably wouldn't say we've got 100% there yet with Dudley, but our system has not been designed for us that way at the moment. Some elements have, but I think if you could get to that point from early onset with the system, would be great.
I suppose
I guess it's complex, isn't it? 'Cause it depends how people access services. It's not always exactly the same, is it? It's very diverse.
And again, I suppose it's down with consent. If it'd be quite a simple task for the system to be able to say, you know, when you create someone on the system, their demographics, if it can highlight that this person is already working with X, Y, and Z services, then you're able then to approach with consent those services. Say, oh, well, they've cropped up with us as well now. Do you want to have a little get together on that? Which is the flip side to the MDT approach, where, and we've seen that in our daily COVID meetings when we've got, you know, mental health, different services with their systems live. So we'll start talking about somebody and go, oh yeah, well, we have got, there's actually an assessment booked with them tomorrow, or they didn't, or they've closed now, or whatever. So there's a couple of different angles that you can come at it with, depending on how we want to do things.
I guess what you could do as well is set up a report where you identify, as long as you've got the kind of proper voluntary sector partnership and the data sharing agreements in place, the system could identify who are the people that have had the most hours of support in 5 areas, say. It'd be almost like who are the frequent attenders of A&E. You could almost create who are the frequent users in the system of multiple agencies, and then you could almost facilitate a bit of an MDT style approach with those organisations, or just a voluntary sector organisation. Okay, well, Joe's had, you know, he's come into the system multiple times, he's been supported by multiple organisations. Things don't seem to be improving in terms of outcome measurements and impact. So what's going on here? What could we do as a system-wide approach to provide better interventions to this person? Because ultimately what you're trying to do is not have this person dependent on those services long term. It's about change and empowerment, isn't it? So they're not reliant on those services long term. But again, you do need to design that about how you do that partnership working locally and how the system could support that.
And driving those efficiencies, because then as a voluntary sector MDT, if you want to call it, you can say, right, well, we're going to, who wants to lead on this person? So, okay, well, we'll back off now and leave that with you. And if he does come back to us about these issues, we'll reiterate how you're with Citizens Advice or Stay or whoever, so you can really, there's less repetition.
Yeah, less duplication, but also better for the individual that not everybody's been involved, you know, particularly if they're very vulnerable. That's not helpful for all the resources, is it?
It is a change in culture though, isn't it? Because what you might want to look at is how do the voluntary sector groups work at the moment. There might be great collaboration within voluntary groups in your area, but it might be about a discussion across commissioners and the sector. Go, we would like you to change the way that you're working. We want you to work in a more holistic, person-centred way, a much more collaborative and joined up way, and then develop sort of systems and processes to enable that to happen. Like Terry said, you could have one voluntary sector group is the lead for that person, and then they make, like a bit like a care coordinator role, they make sure the right services are wrapped around that person and make sure that they communicate stuff about the interventions as what's happening with that person. But that isn't, the sister can support that to happen, but it can't do it in isolation. It needs to be about a conversation and you know, enabling the groups to work in that way with a bit of a culture change.
I've just got one more one, and then I promise I'll really
shut up, Craig.
All right. I'll go second. You go ahead.
Go on, Lynn.
You going to let me go first?
Absolutely, Lynn.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. I know it works in Dudley. Can you tell me some examples of the other users in Dudley, and also how many are on the system?
You, Mike, James.
Yeah, James.
I'm just going to leave it on. I'll just be quiet.
You've got no company at DY1 today, have you?
No.
You're on your charge. Leave it on you.
So in the Dudley system, I believe at the moment we have about 20 organisations using the Dudley system at the moment.
Are they all voluntary sector, James?
Yes.
A lot of those are part of like our voluntary sector consortium as well, around a partnership.
Okay. I'm going to ask the question that everybody wants to ask, but nobody has. What costs are involved in this?
Oh, it's cheap. Oh, it's cheap.
I know you've told me that, Terry, but I'd like somebody else to tell me.
Terry's paying for it.
Where's my mute? Oh.
just quickly put it.
You're on mute again, James.
Put the mic back on, James.
So in terms of cost, it really does depend, because on average our systems can cost from as low as £5,000 to £7,000 for a singular system, all the way to up to £15,000 as being one of our more expensive. I think 17 is the most expensive, but that was quite a large bill for one separate organisation. In terms of a multi-tenanted system, the Dudley system was built as part of the I think it was the additional funding, wasn't it, Kate, that we had from the CCB? So in terms of costing for a multi-tenanted system, again, obviously, I wouldn't I wouldn't be able to sort of provide a bit of an answer to that. I don't know about
I guess it's so there's a few like there's the different areas of the cost. So you'd have the whatever you want the system to be in terms of a build. There'd be obviously a cost for that, and then this is where you'd have a conversation with your partners and kind of voluntary sector groups, because then there's the license fees at the James. So there's a license for each user. So how much is it per user per year? So that obviously pays for things like back office function support and like the license to actually use the system.
Yeah. So in total, I believe the license itself, this goes straight to Salesforce. I think that's £70 per user per year. That's including VAT. And then additionally, it's £100 per user per year for PSIAMS for support, and then that's that's where we would provide support. We do updates as well, so we also do make changes and additions to the system as well as part of that. As opposed to, like, if there were larger projects, then obviously we'd have to look at costs for that. But for the majority of things, around maybe if it's tweaking fields, building reports, like the really on the ground user stuff that's going to need to be changed every day, we take care of that as part of the support that we offer.
But the license fees would be paid by the organisations that use the system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if you had 30 voluntary sector groups using it, they'd obviously have to look at their budgets to see how many staff within their organisation would be using it, and they would pay for that themselves. Obviously, if each individual organisation wanted to develop a platform of their own within PSIAMS, they would have to pay for that build. But it depends if you're having one build across the system as a part of a joint commissioning strategic stuff and an arrangement and a partnership with a select number of organisations, or whether it's for individual groups to use PSIAMS as their own system separately from any kind of commissioning type of arrangement.
And I know you said get it right in the beginning about what information and etc. etc. How long did it take to set this up approximately? I don't kind of want down to the hour, but from kind of start to getting it off the ground, how long did it take?
James, can I just say, because one of the important bits first though is not about the build. As I said, it's spend the time yourselves getting really clear agreement about what you want to use the system for. If it is about, joint commissioners going to come together and have the groups that they commission to use it, I mean, that's up to you in terms of how much time you spend looking at exactly what data you want collected, what data do you want to look at reports from. So I guess the only thing I can say with that is don't sort of cut corners on that, because it will save you a headache further down the line. Once you've agreed that, that's when you go on to the conversation with James, I think, about the build. So I'd spend a good amount of time on that pre-planning stuff first. I won't be able to answer the question about how long it will take to build the system, because obviously that will be James, but it will take you a lot longer if you go, oh, we forgot about this, or actually we don't want that now, can we change that? It gets messy. I'd spend a good amount of time getting that right, because it will save you a whole load of wasted time and a headache further down the line.
as well, it depends on how also bespoke it's going to be as well. If you're looking, again, as how Kate was saying, something that was a bit more, most organisations would use the same thing apart from maybe a couple of things that is to themselves different, then that is going to be that's going to be a shorter amount of time to if it's every organisation that's on it and they have loads and loads of different things. So again, in terms of time, it really does depend on how that specification is going to look, whether it's going to be a lot of things that people share with little tweaks, or if it's going to be, well, actually, a lot of organisations will have loads of different things and a couple of things that they share. So it really, really does depend. But yeah, so unfortunately, I can't
it's okay.
give a solid answer on that.
It's okay. Next question is for you, Terry. I know I said I was only doing 2 before anybody pulls me up, i.e. Craig. Terry, you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah.
The one this afternoon is for providers, isn't it, as far as I understand it?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. How many people have you got coming?
Well, initially, so we had, I mean, if we were holding it physically, we had nearly 40 different individuals. A number of those would have come from a number of different, and some of them would have been from the same organisation. So this afternoon, I've limited it to, there's 15 to 20, depending on if, hopefully they haven't shared that link out to other individuals in their organisation, but there's a lot of interest in it. I think a lot of individual organisations are looking to see, obviously, what they can do, because not everyone is in need of a system. Some organisations may have just forked out for a system themselves. So yeah, we'll wait and see. But yeah, 15 to 20 organisations are attending this afternoon.
Thank you. Finished now, Craig.
Thanks. And you know what? You brought up my favourite topic, money. So basically, yeah, the question that I get asked by Saskia at least 30 times a day is, how much money have we saved today? Namely, non-elective admissions, A&E, attendances and cost, or the big spend items. So I know that when Dudley did their review paper going back probably 12 months ago now, in the first year, you managed to put some big figures in the fact that the amount of A&E attendance is reduced, the cost reduced, the non-electives that reduced, all linked to the work you were doing in this project. How did you get to them figures? How did you collate it? Did you use this system? And how did you get the money back?
So is this in relation to our social prescribing, or is this a different report? James, I'm sorry, I'm just thinking, what report are you?
I think it was the social prescribing one, I think.
Yeah. So we do like an end of yearly evaluation. We've done that each year of our social prescribing, and which is the longest. That's been going for 7 years, and then our high intensity users just in its third year now. So it's funded till March. So we work closely with CCG, because it's the CCG that funds those 2 projects, and we work closely with the CSU, and obviously work closely with the hospital. So we've got a core group that we work with as part of the hospital that identifies those patients jointly about who would benefit from the support. So then we pull off the data. This is where it's the pseudonymised data stuff that comes into it. So we do this slightly separately for the social prescribing project. So we pull off the report out of PSIAMS in terms of the people that we've actually supported, the date of the referral, and their NHS number. We have to sign like the, I can't think what the form's called with the well, we've got data sharing agreements anyway with the hospital kind of in place, and we've got data sharing agreements with the CCG. Then what we do is we sign, is it the pre-identification form thing we have to sign with the CSU? So that identifies why we want the data, what data we'll actually share, how they'll share that data back with us. So once all that's done and kind of it's approved through another department, they send us like this secure email thing that we send that data through. And then CSU who have access to the hospital data, they then produce like an Excel spreadsheet for us, which is then pseudonymized, but we have the SIAMS ID number that's still within that spreadsheet. So then I can go back into the system to say, for example, if there was one patient we've worked with 6 months or 12 months before the date of the referral to us, I don't know, their A&E attendances were like 100. And then during our support and for some time after, so we always either do 6 months, 12 months before, 6 months, 12 months after they were referred to us. I don't know if they're A&E attendance. Well, I can check that then by the SIAMS ID number in our SIAMS system, and I can actually then identify who that person is. But from a CSU point of view, it's also pseudonymized, but just with the SIAMS ID number. And then we can import that data into the system. And then locally, the CCG will say, well, this is how much it costs for an A&E attendance. This is how much for an inpatient, like an admission. And then we can work out the cost from 100 visits before, a cost of 2 visits afterwards. And then you can see what the cost avoidance figure is. Now, we don't get paid back that cost saving. It's just well, I always get confused about what's a cost saving and what's a cost avoidance, because they're slightly two different things, because you don't physically see the money, do you? It's just reducing demand from that person on the system. But it will clearly show that there's a reduction in that demand. So therefore there is a cost avoidance within the system. So that's, and we've done it similarly with the CCG and GP attendances. So there's a data person in the CCG that can, I can again give him the list with the SIAMS ID numbers. He'll then pull off a list remotely through all the English GP systems, and then I use the SIAMS ID number that you can then, and we've used like a separate, there was a lot of data dumping with the GP. The GP stuff was harder, the hospital stuff's a lot easier, because there's so many different, secure systems within each GP practice. But then we've used that within the system to then identify, again, 6 to 12 months before GP visit, 6 months, 12 months after. And then the stats show then that there is a reduction. I guess the hardest thing to prove is, because it's just lack of capacity within the project and I guess across the system, is are those reductions as a direct result of our interventions, or has something else happened for those people? Now, getting your head around how you prove that. Feedback from the patients have told us, and the outcome measurements and stuff like that could hopefully support that without our intervention, maybe it would still have been 100 after and 100 before, but the data shows a very strong trend that across the board of the people we've worked with, there has been a massive reduction. So I guess you could then apply some sort of theory to that, to think, well, we've got to be doing something right. Those interventions must be working to get that reduction. But I guess you've got nothing to compare it to, a different type of intervention to our interventions. I guess that's the hard bit. But
I feel from what was, I remember what Rihanna had said from Blackpool about, when they funded the service and it was all great and it's like, oh, job done, and then they stopped it. And then 6 months later, attendance right back up again. So yeah.
So yeah, it is just working closely with your partners across the system to be able to get access to bits of data. SIAMS system alone won't do that for you, but it's about working with other partners and getting access to their data and pseudonymized to then import it in and then do the workings out. Which is why we worked really heavily on proper partnership agreements across the system, and actually about what are we trying to achieve here, what data do we need access to. Or somebody to give us the data that we don't see the patient data itself. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks, Kate. James, thanks everybody. I'm going to shut up now.
Has anybody else got any other questions?
Rob Montgomery here. I've got a questions. My questions are really around data protection. I have no to say I've got no interest in the service side is slightly harsh, but I'm not a service person, I'm a data person. So the first question would probably be maybe to James in respect of, has the system had a data protection impact assessment completed on it? Would be my first question. Secondly, I wasn't clear whether local authority data would be fed into the system or not. And if it is, does that create some duplication, given that most organisations have their own management information systems already? So are they pumping this information into their own system and then duplicating that by putting it into this system. And then thirdly was really one more of a general one around, if this is going to be used potentially by the health economy, this is probably something that should be pushed through the digital enablement group, which is the regional group including CSU, CCG, local authorities, etc. And it's all about, as the name suggests, digital projects for health and social care data. So there was a lot there, I appreciate, but
No, that's
those are my main points.
So, Rob, in terms of the local authority question, so Dudley Council here don't use PSIAMS currently. It was commissioned to be a system that was made available for voluntary sector groups in terms of better data management and collection and demonstrating outcomes and impact for commissioners. So the local authority staff will have their own variety of different IT systems that they use. If that's a route that you're going down, well, it all goes back to why you want the system, I guess. So is it a system that commissioners want voluntary sector groups to use to have more strategic data on the interventions and outcomes that the sector's making, or are you looking at it as a system that local authority or staff will use? So I guess there's a question back at you in terms of, again, it goes back to the purpose of why you want this system. Because the council, I guess, Telford could still continue to use their own systems if this is just purely for the voluntary sector and around commissioning arrangements and better data management to inform commissioning decisions. It could potentially be used by local authority staff as well, but I guess it goes back to your purpose. In terms of the impact stuff, James, you might have the answer to that question, because some of that will be about the Salesforce stuff behind the system. We've had to do kind of impact assessments on data separately as separate projects. So we had to do it with the CCG and the hospital as part of our data sharing agreements in terms of how we're holding the data, where's the data being stored, what would happen if there was a data breach, and making sure there was proper data agreements and consent in place for the service users and for whoever's going to be accessing that data in the system, like our commissioners. But I'm sure probably from a sales point of view, they would have done data impact stuff.
Yeah, there is, because obviously, because that will all be sort of aimed towards more Salesforce rather than PSIAMS, really, because it's all stored there. There are lots of different security information, data protection, different things like that. What I can do is, Rob, I can find that all out for you, and I can send you, or via myself or via Terry, all of that information over, and then that will include quite a lot of the other security features as well, data protection. I can put that all in because that's all going to be on Salesforce's website. But I'll have to find that out for you because I'm not too sure where it is offhand, but I can get that over to you.
Okay, thank you.
With that, as I said, I will be sharing this recording with all members on all attendees via email, so you'll all have each other's email addresses to carry on the conversation. Anything else from anyone else?
So I just want to, let me just quickly follow up on that, if that's okay. Kate, I completely agree with you. It will be down to the purpose that the local authority here want to use it. So that'll be probably a question for ourselves. As I said, if it's a system that potentially might be used wider by health colleagues or voluntary sector, again, as I said, it might be worth pushing it through this digital enablement group just to get some coordination of projects, because I know one project in particular that they're looking at the minute is something called an integrated care record, and it has sort of certain smells similar to this system in terms of aggregation of data to almost for a golden record in CRM terms. So I don't know whether it is worth you discussing that with them. I can provide the details of who heads that if that's helpful.
Yeah, no, that would be really, really useful. Definitely in terms of like the integrated care systems, and because we're having our Dudley integrated healthcare provider, which will be the only one around the country locally, which was going to be called the MCP, then the ICP, now it's the DIHC. So they're looking at integrated care systems for the borough as well. Also looking into the STP stuff, isn't it, as well? So yeah, any details on that you could share would be great. I mean, I guess locally, because we've been involved in the new care model for Dudley just before our social prescribing project started 7 years ago. We were one of the vanguard areas. I sit on kind of like the partnership boards across the health system, and IT systems just, across the system are just a bit of a minefield.
Yeah.
In Dudley, they were trying to get one IT system when we were a vanguard, and the hospital were really resistant to that. And certain departments within the local authority were quite resistant to that, because I guess they're quite like to have their own systems, I guess, don't they, for their own kind of organisations. So it was kind of incredibly. I know the partnership board struggled with that. It was quite incredibly hard to get to a point of one system used by all. So yeah, if we could get to that point, I think would be would be great.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Kate.
And in some cases, it is about developing those systems to allow those systems to talk to each other, isn't it, James? I know before, when I was speaking to Mark Ellaby, the creator who's no longer with us, talking about, you know, creating a box that these different boxes can talk into and then pass things around.
Yeah.
So it is doable, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. The possibilities are there, but I think, you know, from what Kate said a few times, it is just about having those conversations and getting those sharing agreements in place, really, because the system can enable quite a lot of things. We haven't really hit anything that we haven't been able to either overcome or find a way around of actually providing something. It's just those real key conversations to start with, really.
I mean, you didn't have the opportunities to connect it in with the IMIS system that the GPs use. It's just, it would take a bit of work to get those agreements in place, and for the GPs to allow for that, and, you know, working through the data agreements, isn't it? But yeah, there's potential.
It does have an open API for all you tech people out there. It does have a so you can connect quite a lot of different things to it.
Good luck getting anything from EMIS to agree to anything.
I know. Well, that was some of the challenges. They wanted that one system across GPs, the hospital, and sort of CCGs. But it was a challenge, which hasn't been cracked yet.
Are there any other questions from anybody else?
If there's anything in the chat function, I don't think there's any other questions in the chat function.
No, I don't think so.
No. Okay. Well, James, Kate, thank you ever so much, and we'll continue this conversation. Like I say, I'll share this recording out to all attendees, and hopefully it can be the start of some conversations to reach that vision where we have that single system for the voluntary sector. So wish us luck for this afternoon, and we will I'll get this email out and we'll speak again.
Just before we end, can I just ask a question? I just thought, just in terms of what you're looking for locally, because we've got the session with the groups this afternoon. So is your kind of vision to have like one common assessment kind of tool that the organisations that you commission, you want them to use the same assessment tool, so you get that data across organisations that's kind of consistent and the same sort of data that they're capturing? Is that what you're kind of looking for? Or is it, because obviously there's such diverse services within the voluntary sector, each voluntary sector group will go, well, I don't want to use that common assessment. I want to have my own assessment for my own organisation as housing, or I want this as a mental health service. Because I'm just wondering whether maybe groups would welcome having one outcome assessment that they all use, or whether there'd be resistance to that, because it's a culture change, isn't it? Sort of groups like to be able to capture the information that they feel is relevant for their service. But I just wondered whether you're looking at sort of a one sort of consistent way of collecting data off organisations, or you might not have the answers to that at the moment.
I mean, go on. Sorry, Craig, what are you going to say?
Yeah, I'm going to speak again. I think we've got so many services locally that are very close to each other and aren't connected, and that is just from a CCG point of view. There's loads of good projects and pieces of work going on, and there's outside of that, or the voluntary sector, the other organisations, social, local authority. I think that's our key piece of work now, is bringing them together to talk better. I think bringing piece of software to the table, whether it means that they start looking at that piece of software as the initiation for it, or whether it just makes them think we need to start talking better first. I don't see any harm in mentioning that it's certainly used and how it's used and the benefits that you've had from it. But I think it will be about them providers actually saying, actually, we could take this on board. We've seen how this has been worked elsewhere, and let's start talking to each other because we're all working with the same people.
Yeah, okay. No, that's great. I just wondered if we were going to get asked any questions this afternoon about, are our commissioners telling us that we've got to use this system, or are they telling us what paperwork and what outcomes they want us to collect consistently across, the same across our organisations. But yeah.
I mean, what I can say from the voluntary sector point of view is that, reading up on the event that Caro had held last year, there is the ask is from the voluntary sector for a common assessment tool, or common outcomes measurement tool to be used across the sector. So it would be useful for commissioners to want the same. I mean, I know it's difficult because what I've found here in Telford, which is probably similar in other parts of the country, after austerity and a lot of services, after a lot of cutbacks, a lot of voluntary sector organisations went out there and found other funding from other sources, which means that sometimes there's overlap in terms of services that are trying to achieve the same things, but they're being commissioned from different organisations. So it's left the local authority a little bit lost somewhat to say, well, we're paying for this service here, but actually National Lottery have paid for this similar service here, and so it's a little bit bitty. So the idea, hopefully, with this as well, will be bringing together. It doesn't matter who's commissioning what, but if commissioners can see what the general trends are, then they'll be able to commission more effectively.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, one of the areas, it depends on what sort of some of the priorities in your area. So for Dudley, and this again might be really similar across other areas, but measuring kind of isolation and loneliness is really big and is like a top priority for our area with the local authority and the CCG. So where the system is kind of helping groups is that organisations might have their own ways at the moment of capturing data against isolation scaling, but that can be quite different. So that makes it quite hard to see what impact the voluntary sectors have on reducing isolation. So we're looking locally, public health and CCG are really keen on asking organisations to use the same measurement tool on isolation within PSIAMS. So then they've got one data set from the same data set from different organisations, and then we can start to look at the heat maps about where were the biggest pockets of isolation and how has that changed over a period of time. So using the same data set as for us just in relation to isolation alone is going to be really, really useful. And the sector can see the value in that, because then it's not just about individual outcomes achieved by an organisation, it's outcomes achieved on isolation from the sector across a range of organisations. So you could pick certain target areas that you want groups to collect the same measurement tools on, rather than everything, perhaps. I'll shut up now. I've been talking too much.
Were you going to say something?
Sorry, was that me? I couldn't hear what you
sorry,
said.
I thought you were gonna. I thought you'd.
I was going to ask a question, but I don't know if it's just because I'm late in the meeting and the conversations. I may have missed this already. Because whereabouts are you in discussions around this? I mean, is this the first meeting? How many meetings have there been? I was just wondering about this afternoon's meeting with the voluntary sector. Where are we at? So that are they early on in this discussion?
It was very early on. This is this is the first meeting of this type where I've tried to bring together people from the local authority and from the CCG and whatnot. And yeah, the event this afternoon it's the first event after conversations that I'd had with colleagues across the sector who were interested. People were interested to see what this system was that I was going on about all the time. So and then it just kind of snowballed somewhat. So I thought, well, might as well just organise something and get these people together. But I mean, the dream for me would be for commissioners to match fund each other to commission PSIAMS to build as many systems as they can in X amount of months for as many organisations. I think that's how it kind of started in Dudley, wasn't it? I think we had some money to go out there and just build as many systems as you can for the voluntary sector, whoever wants to get involved, and really started the ball rolling, really. So, you know, if we can have a look down the back of the sofa and find anything to help us do that, then that would be great. But yeah, that's where we are anyway, Saskia.
Lovely, thank you. Just so I understand where we're at now, thanks.
Yeah. And just on when you mentioned priorities there, Kate, I'm just conscious with, hi Lynn. What would you say, coming from public health? I mean, just
God.
You know, what would you say our priorities are here in Telford? Sorry.
Yeah, you put me on the spot now, haven't you? Oh, my microphone's not working.
No, we can hear you.
No, I was kidding. Obviously, kind of, well, as far as I'm concerned, at least, you've got all the stuff about, mental health, drugs and alcohol, homelessness, housing. I mean, as far as kind of local authority and the STP are concerned, alcohol is a big one at the moment. I spoke with Saskia the other day about the Blue Light project, and we've got further discussions scheduled about that one. But it's also about, I mean, what we've spoken with in the homelessness one as well. So, Stacey, anything else? Is she still there?
I'm still here. Yeah. I mean, you know, there's just so many priorities, isn't there? I suppose.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking back to the point from Rob in relation to going back to that digital enablement group and trying to understand what their strategy and planning is and how this links. And I think that would be a really good starter for sure. But, you know, some of the practical examples we've experienced during COVID, you know, clearly there is a need for some type of coordination of a system within the voluntary organisation, but how that links you know, into local authority systems and take that point on board that everybody's got their own information systems and how that links in. Clearly we don't want people to duplicate what they're including. So doesn't really answer the question, but I suppose I'm just pondering on, you know, we've got a big mountain to climb really to implement.
I guess probably some real common priorities across England really, isn't it, is around resilient communities, people doing more for themselves, being you know, more empowered, less reliant on services, the voluntary sector focusing a lot more on prevention and enabling people to do more for themselves. I mean, that's quite a big area of a priority as well, isn't it, going forward?
We were talking about that yesterday, about resilient communities, and actually now I'm thinking that I should have invited that person to the meeting as well, but you know, we can continue the discussions.
We can. I mean, like I say, I have recorded this, so I'll send it on to each of the attendees, and obviously you can share that out with whoever you wish, and then we can have some further conversations down the line.
Definitely.
Lovely. Well, that takes us to lunch. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Terry. It's nice to meet you all.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Bye. Bye. Still there.
Just removing people. Right, let me just stop recording.
Yeah.